In a small, unassuming cafe at the corner of a quiet street, the clink of coffee cups and the hum of low conversation create a familiar backdrop. The door swings open, letting in a rush of cool morning air. A man in his late 70s, with graying hair and weathered features, enters, making his way to the corner table near the window. He sits, his body moving slowly, a slight tremor in his hands as he places a well-worn leather wallet on the table. The man orders a cup of coffee, his voice soft but steady, like a man who has learned to speak less over the years. He stares out the window, as if waiting for something. Or perhaps remembering someone. His eyes, though clouded with age, hold a depth that suggests decades of untold stories. The barista, a young woman in her 20s, notices him briefly, offering a polite smile before continuing with her duties. He's just another regular, no different from the countless others who pass through this cafe every day. As he sips his coffee, the door opens once more, and a man in his early 40s enters. He's tall, well-dressed, and looks like someone used to being noticed. He scans the room, his gaze falling on the elderly man in the corner. His steps slow as he recognizes the face, familiar, yet distant. The younger man hesitates for a moment before making his way to the table. "Excuse me, sir," the man says, his voice carrying a slight edge of curiosity. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I know you from somewhere. Were you in the military? You look so familiar." The veteran looks up, his face unreadable for a moment. He doesn't speak right away, his fingers curling slightly around the edges of his cup. For a long beat, he says nothing, just watches the younger man with those eyes that have seen too much to be easily deciphered. The younger man shifts uneasily, sensing that he might have crossed a line. The veteran finally responds, his voice rough from years of disuse. "But that was a long time ago. Doesn't matter now." The younger man, undeterred by the vague response, takes a seat across from him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. I've been reading about some old stories from the war. And your face, there's something about it. I guess I thought I might have seen you in one of those photos." The veteran gives him a small, almost imperceptible nod. He doesn't want to talk about it. He's learned, over the years, that some things are better left unsaid. The silence lingers between them like an invisible wall. The younger man, however, isn't finished. He looks around the room, eyes landing on a framed photograph on the wall, a black and white shot of soldiers, some of them familiar faces. "I can't help but wonder," he continues, his voice tentative, "what it was like, being in the middle of all that." The veteran glances at the photograph, his expression darkening for a fraction of a second. The memories are still there, tucked away in the recesses of his mind, but they don't come easily. He takes another sip of his coffee, his hands shaking slightly more now. He doesn't know how to explain the weight of the years, the faces of the men who didn't make it home, the ones who died before their time. He knows he can't capture it in a simple conversation. Some things are too heavy to talk about, even with a stranger who is only trying to understand. "You wouldn't understand," the veteran mutters, his voice barely audible. The younger man leans in, a slight sense of urgency in his tone. "What do you mean?" "I think I could understand, sir. I've always admired soldiers, They're heroes. You guys did things that none of us could even imagine. I don't know. I guess I want to know what it was really like. Not the stuff they teach us in school." The veteran looks at him, his gaze sharpening for a moment. He studies the younger man's eager expression, the naive curiosity in his eyes. The world has changed so much since the veteran last put on his uniform. But in some ways, it hasn't. Some things stay with you, no matter how much time passes. He places his cup down gently on the saucer, the motion deliberate, almost methodical. He wants to say more. He wants to tell this man about the horrors he's seen, about the comrades he lost, about the guilt that's been with him every single day since the war ended. But he doesn't. Instead, he says something far simpler. "War changes you. You don't leave it behind, no matter how hard you try. The younger man sits back, the words sinking in slowly. He's not sure how to respond. The silence stretches between them, comfortable now, like a thread that connects the two of them, one that doesn't need to be pulled on. As the minutes tick by, the young man finally stands. He's not sure what he expected from this conversation, but it wasn't this. There's something heavy in the air, a weight he can't quite describe. The veteran watches him for a moment, his eyes steady. "Thanks for talking to me," the younger man says quietly, turning to leave. The veteran doesn't answer. Instead, he picks up his coffee, his hand steady now, and looks back out the window. The young man walks away, and for a moment, the veteran allows himself to remember. But only for a moment. Because some stories, some memories, are better left untold. The man at the table, who had been sitting quietly observing the veteran, finally decided to take the chance to ask him directly. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "I couldn't help but notice the way you carry yourself. You seem different, as if you've lived 1,000 lifetimes in a single moment. Are you a hero?" The veteran took a slow sip of his coffee, his fingers trembling slightly as they wrapped around the cup. His deep-set eyes never left the man, his gaze heavy with something that could have been a mixture of sadness, regret, and something else, something unspoken. It was as if the weight of his past had formed a barrier, one that he wasn't sure he could ever break down, even if he wanted to. The younger man leaned in, sensing that the veteran might be more than just a quiet old man with a mysterious past. He glanced around the cafe, making sure no one else was paying attention, as if there were something deeply personal happening between them. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be too forward," the young man said, his voice softer now, trying to seem less intrusive. "It's just. I can tell you've been through a lot. And sometimes, heroes, they don't always get the recognition they deserve." The veteran's eyes flickered briefly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Heroes," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head slightly as if to dismiss the word, before looking directly at the man. "You think you know what it means, but you don't. It's not something you can explain. It's something you live with." The young man was taken aback. His curiosity only deepened, and for the first time, he could see that there was far more to this man than he had first assumed. "Then what is it, sir? What is it that makes someone a hero?" The veteran took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment as he gathered his thoughts. He wasn't sure if he was ready to open up, but something about this young man's persistence stirred a flicker of empathy in him. He leaned back slightly, settling more comfortably in his chair, before speaking again, this time with a voice that held a certain weight to it. "Heroes," he started slowly, "are people who don't get to choose their battles. They don't get to pick the day, the place, or the circumstances. They don't get to decide who lives and who dies. But they still show up, even when every instinct in their body is telling them to run the other way. And when it's all over, you don't get medals. You don't get parades. You don't get to tell the world what happened. You just live with the aftermath." The young man felt a chill run down his spine. He could hear the truth in the veteran's words, and it made him uncomfortable in a way he hadn't expected. It was as if the veteran wasn't just speaking about himself, but about everyone who had ever been affected by war, the silent warriors who bore the scars without ever asking for recognition. The kind of heroes who were never asked if they wanted to be heroes in the first place. The silence between them grew heavy, and for a moment, the young man wasn't sure what to say. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into the veteran's past, but something in the veteran's demeanor made him hold back. The old man wasn't ready to share everything. He wasn't ready to reveal the stories that weighed so heavily on him. Just then, the veteran shifted slightly in his seat, as if the weight of the conversation had become too much to bear. He glanced out the window, looking at nothing in particular, as if lost in the echoes of his memories. The young man didn't push any further, instead, he simply sat quietly, respecting the veteran's space, understanding that some things could never be explained in words. "All I can tell you is this, the veteran said after a long pause, heroes don't wear capes. They wear the memories, the guilt, and the pain. They wear it every day. It's a weight you carry until the day you die. And then, maybe, it's someone else's turn to carry it for you. The young man sat there, stunned, as the realization dawned on him. He had been expecting a story about valor, about glory, about fighting for a cause that was larger than life. But what the veteran had shared with him was something far deeper. It was the truth about the human cost of war. It was the truth about what it meant to survive when others didn't. It was the silent heroism of those who didn't need the world to know their name. As the veteran stood up to leave, he glanced at the young man one last time, his expression unreadable. "You want to be a hero," he said quietly. "Start by listening. Start by seeing the things no one else is willing to see." And with that, the veteran walked out of the cafe, leaving the young man to sit there, silently contemplating the weight of the words that had just been spoken. The young man sat there for a long time after the veteran left, his mind racing with thoughts that he didn't fully understand. The words the old man had spoken lingered in his head like an echo, reverberating through his thoughts. He had come into the cafe expecting to meet a quiet, reserved man who perhaps had a simple, ordinary life. Instead, he had met someone who carried an entire world inside him, someone who had experienced things he could never imagine. He wasn't sure if he felt inspired or devastated, but either way, he knew his perception of the world had shifted. As he left the cafe and walked down the street, he couldn't stop thinking about the weight of silence that seemed to surround the veteran. It wasn't just the words the man had spoken, it was the unspoken. The things he hadn't said. The things he couldn't say. The young man had never really thought much about the unsung heroes of the world. He had read about them in books and seen the movies, but the reality had never really clicked. To him, heroes were always the ones in the headlines, the ones with medals, the ones who had grand stories to tell. But now, he understood. Heroes were also the ones who returned home with wounds that couldn't be seen, the ones who carried burdens no one else knew about. And sometimes, those heroes were silent. He decided to walk to the nearby park, the one where the veteran had likely spent many quiet hours alone, reflecting on the past. It was a place where people went to relax, to enjoy the day, but it was also a place where the memories of those who had come before quietly lingered. As he sat on a bench under the shade of a tree, he found himself reflecting on his own life. He thought about the things he took for granted, the simple joys, the small victories, and the comforts of a life that, for the most part, was untouched by the kinds of experiences the veteran had endured. For the first time, he wondered if he had ever truly appreciated what it meant to be alive, to be safe, to have the things he took for granted. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he truly understood about the world around him. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed an elderly man walking slowly toward the park. The man had a cane and a slow, deliberate pace, his back slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible load. The young man looked at him for a moment and then quickly looked away, thinking that the man didn't look much different from the veteran. A quiet presence, a man whose life had been shaped by things the world would never fully comprehend. A hero, in his own right. And yet, the world would never know. The young man felt an odd pang in his chest, a sudden desire to know more, to listen to the stories of these people whose lives had been filled with hardships he could never imagine. He felt a deep sense of responsibility to understand, to learn, and to share those stories with others. He realized that he had been given a gift that many others would never have, the chance to meet someone like the veteran. The chance to see the world through their eyes, even if it was only for a brief moment. It was then that the young man decided that he wouldn't let the silence remain. He wouldn't let the stories of these unsung heroes go unheard. He would listen, he would ask, and he would share what he had learned with the world. He would carry their stories with him, not as a burden, but as a privilege. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the park. The young man stood up and began walking home, his thoughts still wrapped around the conversation he'd had earlier. The world seemed different now. It seemed heavier, somehow. But it was also more meaningful. He realized that every moment in life, every encounter, was an opportunity to understand something deeper, something more real than the surface level of things. The veteran had opened his eyes to a truth he couldn't ignore. As he walked down the street, he passed a small store where he saw a display of old photographs in the window. One of the photos caught his eye. It was a picture of a soldier, much like the one the veteran had described. He stopped, staring at the picture for a moment before walking inside. Something told him that the journey wasn't over yet. The story he had just begun to hear was far from finished. And as the young man stood there, looking at the photo of a soldier whose name he didn't know, he made a silent promise to never forget. He would keep asking, keep learning, and keep sharing the stories that needed to be told. The world, he realized, had a lot more heroes than it knew. And it was time to start recognizing them.